You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. He was the heir to a billion-dollar real estate empire, but behind closed doors, Robert Durst was hiding dark secrets. A missing wife, a best friend found executed, a dismembered neighbor dumped in trash bags. For decades, he evaded justice until one chilling moment caught on a hot mic changed everything. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Robert Durst and how a whispered confession finally brought him down. Chapter 1. Born into privilege. Shaped by tragedy, Robert Allen Durst was born on April 12, 1943, into immense privilege. He was the eldest son of Seymour Durst, a prominent New York City real estate magnate whose Durst organization would come to control a large portion of Manhattan's skyline. The family's wealth and social status put Robert in elite circles from a young age, and he attended prestigious schools, including Scarsdale High School, followed by Lehigh University, and eventually a brief stint at UCLA. But behind the pristine image of upper-class life, Robert's childhood was far from idyllic. At the age of 7, he reportedly witnessed his mother, Bernice Durst, die by suicide after falling or possibly jumping from the roof of their family home. The traumatic incident left deep psychological scars. Years later, Robert would describe this event as a defining moment in his life, one that twisted his emotional development. As he grew older, Robert became increasingly estranged from his family. He was socially awkward, intensely private, and often exhibited odd behavior. While his father had hoped Robert would take over the family business, those hopes were dashed. In 1992, Seymour Durst passed the reins to Robert's younger brother, Douglas, a decision that Robert never forgave. The rift was permanent. By the early 1990s, Robert had severed ties with the Durst organization and had been bought out of his share in the company. Despite the family exile, Robert was still enormously wealthy. With tens of millions at his disposal, he lived on his own terms. But rather than retreat quietly into anonymity, Robert Durst would become embroiled in a series of increasingly bizarre and violent events, beginning with the mysterious disappearance of his wife. Chapter 2. The vanishing of Kathie Durst. Kathleen Kathie McCormack was a bright, ambitious young woman from a working-class family in Long Island. She met Robert Durst in 1971, and they married 2 years later. By all accounts, the early days of their marriage were affectionate, but that facade began to crumble over time. Friends later described Robert as jealous and controlling, and Kathie frequently confided that she felt threatened by him. Kathie had enrolled in the Albert Einstein College of Medicine with dreams of becoming a doctor. But by 1981, she was preparing to divorce Robert. She told friends that she feared for her life and had even begun documenting incidents of abuse. In one chilling episode, she showed up at a friend's house in tears, wearing only a robe and claiming Robert had beaten her. On January 31st, 1982, Kathie was last seen alive. Robert claimed he had driven her to the train station so she could return to Manhattan from their South Salem home. He said he spoke with her later that night by phone, but no one else heard from her again. He waited 4 days before reporting her missing after her medical school called to report she hadn't shown up. The initial investigation was marred by missteps. The police treated Kathie's disappearance as a routine missing person case, and Robert was never thoroughly interrogated. No physical evidence was collected, and no search warrant was executed on the South Salem house. Incredibly, one of Robert's friends, Susan Berman, would later admit to making a phone call to Kathie's school pretending to be Kathie, a move believed to be an effort to cover up her disappearance. Though suspicion swirled, the case stalled for decades. It wasn't until 2017, after renewed public interest and pressure, that Kathie Durst was officially declared legally dead. In 2021, nearly 40 years after her disappearance, Robert Durst was finally charged in connection with her presumed murder, but justice would come too late. Chapter 3. The Mysterious Execution of Susan Berman. Susan Berman, a journalist and author, was one of Robert Durst's closest confidants. The daughter of Davy Berman, a major figure in Las Vegas organized crime, Susan was no stranger to secrecy and the value of silence. She had defended Robert publicly and privately, especially as suspicion around Kathie's disappearance gained momentum in the late 1990s. In December 2000, Berman was facing financial hardship and had recently received $50,000 from Durst. At the same time, investigators in Westchester County, New York, had reopened the Kathie Durst case and intended to question Susan. Before that could happen, Susan was found murdered in her Benedict Canyon home in Los Angeles, shot once in the back of the head, execution style. There were no signs of forced entry, indicating she likely knew her killer. Shortly after her death, an anonymous note was sent to the Beverly Hills Police Department with the word cadaver and her address. The word Beverly was misspelled, an unusual error that would become crucial evidence years later. For a long time, Susan's murder was another unsolved mystery. But handwriting analysis and the context of the cadaver note began pointing squarely at Robert Durst. The timing of her death, just before she was to speak to investigators, suggested she was silenced. Durst, once again, vanished into the background. Chapter 4. Galveston, Disguise, and the Dismembered Neighbor. By 2001, Durst had taken on a new persona. He was now living in a rundown apartment in Galveston, Texas, dressed as a mute woman named Dorothy Siner, a name he stole from a former classmate. This bizarre disguise was an attempt to live off the grid and avoid mounting scrutiny, but trouble found him yet again. In September 2001, authorities discovered human body parts floating in Galveston Bay. The remains were quickly identified as Morris Black, Durst's 71-year-old neighbor. Durst was arrested after a trail of evidence, blood in his apartment, a saw, and rental records linked him directly to the crime. But the most shocking development was yet to come. Durst admitted to killing and dismembering Black, but claimed it was done in self-defense. He testified that they struggled over a gun and that he panicked after the shooting. Despite having cut up a man's body and discarded it in garbage bags, Durst was acquitted of murder in 2003. The jury accepted the self-defense argument, largely due to a lack of evidence about how the confrontation began. He was convicted on lesser charges related to bail jumping and evidence tampering, but served less than 3 years in prison. It was an astonishing outcome. Durst had killed a man, admitted to dismembering him, and walked free. His ability to manipulate the legal system had reached almost mythical proportions. Chapter 5. The Jinx and the Hot Mic Confession in 2010. Director Andrew Uretsky released a film loosely inspired by Robert Durst's life called All Good Things. In a strange twist, Durst contacted Uretsky and offered to participate in a documentary to tell his side of the story. What followed was the HBO series The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, which aired in 2015 and reignited public interest in all 3 cases linked to him. Over hours of interviews, Durst gave increasingly contradictory statements. The filmmakers uncovered new evidence, including a handwriting sample that matched the cadaver note sent after Susan Berman's murder. When shown the letter, Durst appeared visibly shaken. But the most damning moment came off camera. In a break between interviews, unaware that his microphone was still on, Durst went to the bathroom and muttered to himself, "There it is. You're caught. What the hell did I do?" killed them all, of course. That recording, while fragmented and possibly rambling, was enough to spur action. It was a rare moment of unfiltered insight into a man long suspected of murder. On March 14th, 2015, just one day before the final episode of The Jinx, heir Robert Durst was arrested in New Orleans. He was charged with the murder of Susan Berman. Chapter 6. The long-awaited trial. Robert Durst's legal team delayed proceedings for years through a series of motions, appeals, and health-related postponements. But in March 2020, his trial for the murder of Susan Berman finally began in Los Angeles. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the trial was suspended after just a few days and didn't resume until May 2021. Over the course of months, the prosecution laid out a meticulous case. They argued that Durst killed Berman to prevent her from revealing what she knew about Kathie Durst's disappearance. They presented the cadaver note, the bathroom confession, and a litany of circumstantial evidence that painted a damning picture. Durst took the stand in his own defense, a move seen as risky and denied killing Susan. He claimed he had found her body and sent the cadaver note anonymously to avoid suspicion, but his performance was erratic. At times, he appeared confused and contradicting. On September 17, 2021, after just a few hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. 1 month later, Robert Durst was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a legal and moral victory for the families of his victims finally, after nearly 40 years. Chapter 7. Justice interrupted by death. Just weeks after his conviction, a grand jury in Westchester County, New York, indicted Robert Durst for the second-degree murder of Kathie Durst, citing new witness statements and forensic evidence gathered over the years. Prosecutors were finally ready to charge him in the case that started it all, but justice was short-lived. On January 10, 2022, Robert Durst died in a prison hospital at the age of 78. He had been suffering from multiple ailments, including bladder cancer and complications from COVID-19. His death marked the end of one of the most bizarre, disturbing sagas in modern American criminal history. Durst left behind a legacy not of high-rise buildings and family fortune, but of disappearances, secrets, and bloodshed. In the end, it wasn't the system that brought him down, it was his own arrogance, his own voice, and his inability to stop talking. For decades, Robert Durst had eluded justice, but even he couldn't run forever. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, may your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.